This is not only my scariest experience, but also the time I almost got my now boyfriend murdered because of a shitty sexual innuendo. I used to work at a Pizza Hut in a pretty shitty area of Tucson. Think lots of trailer parks, crappy apartments, and shitty duplexes. Most people were on drugs and welfare, so tips were very rare. That evening, a man had ordered a large meat lover's pizza with extra sausage, and another driver took his delivery. Before the driver even came back, the man already called the store complaining his pizza was so spicy that it was inedible, and he would like a new one. While it was likely impossible, the pizza was actually spicy and this dude probably just wanted free food. We obliged and handed the driver a new pizza when he returned to take back to the customer. Well, this did not appease him. Over the span of a couple of hours, the man called 2 more times, insisting that the pizza was way too spicy, he couldn't eat it. We kept bringing him new pizzas, but this time we were taking back the old ones for quality checks when really, we were just tossing them in the dumpster in hopes that this guy would give up his scam. Finally, it got to be about 11 p.m. with 1 hour left until closing. And the man had once again called back saying that he cannot eat his pizza. He needed a new one. At this point, we suspected that there was something seriously wrong with this guy, and no one wanted to go out there in the middle of the night to confront him. So the manager informed him that there was unfortunately no way that we could appease him, but if he came down to the store tomorrow, he would be happy to issue him a refund. We thought that was the end of it. I was not a closer that night, so I was cashing out at the front register when a beater truck screeched into the parking lot and parked right at the front door. A rather disheveled and overweight man came in holding a pizza. He put the pizza on the counter and informed me he was here for his refund. I called the manager. While I was still up front calculating my cash for the night, the man opened up the box and started talking to me. Dude, this pizza is so fucking spicy. You gotta try this shit. It's unreal. Someone must have been putting chiltepins in the sauce or some shit. I just awkwardly let him know I believed him and moved out of the way so the manager could issue the refund. As this was going on, the man started getting more agitated. He pushed his pizza towards the manager, repeating, "Man, you gotta try this pizza. You gotta believe me. It's so spicy," all the while jabbing his pointer finger into the pizza and mashing it up into a disgusting mess. My manager kept telling him it was fine, he believed him, but the man remained insistent and shoved the pizza towards my manager. Finally, the manager let him know, "No, I do not want to eat that pizza. And now I need to ask you to leave." The man then took his pizza and walked out. During all this, the waitress, cook, and other 2 drivers had come up to the front to see what all the yelling about spicy pizza was about. The other driver, who I had a bit of a crush on, was standing next to me. Once the man got into his truck and started to pull away, I turned to the driver and said, "Hey Kevin, wanna try my pizza?" And everyone just burst out laughing. Our laughter was short-lived, though, as the truck screeched to a halt and zoomed back into the parking space. Tweaker man stormed back into the store, seriously pissed off and out for blood. He began screaming at my fellow driver, "Do you think something is fucking funny? Am I funny? Are you fucking laughing at me? You think this pizza bullshit is fucking funny?" Everyone was dead silent as my fellow driver sputtered along, trying to get a word in, but the man wouldn't have it. He climbed onto the counter and started screaming, "I'll teach you to laugh at me. Let's fucking go outside. Right now. I'll fucking teach you." For context, this man had to be about 40 to 50. My now boyfriend was 22 and spindly thin. This was frightening as fuck. My manager managed to coerce the man off the counter and got him outside, immediately locking the door. The man screamed at the door for a few seconds before retreating to his truck and pulling away. So we thought that was the end of it, until the truck began circling the building with a fucking gun being pointed out the driver's window. Everyone immediately hit the deck. The waitress started sobbing and my manager blindly reached up, trying to grab the phone off the counter to call 911. Every once in a while we peeked up and this insane fucker was still circling. When he finally stopped, everyone crept to the back of the store and peeked out the window. Dude had parked next to the driver cars, waiting for one of us to come out on a delivery. The dude stuck around for around 15 minutes before taking off. The cops of course didn't show up until like an hour later because it's freaking Tucson and they suck. I had to sneak out before they came in hopes I wasn't going to get shot. The next day, the man repeatedly called the store to scream at people, claiming we attacked him and threw crushed red peppers in his eyes. Since we had his address and phone number in the system, cops finally picked him up, and we didn't hear from him again. He also got himself a nice place on the do not deliver list. This happened when I was about 14 and had just started babysitting for a family in my neighborhood. They had 2 kids, a 10-year-old boy and an 8-year-old girl. They were great to babysit, always getting along without fighting and doing what I asked without any complaints. Before I get into what happened, I need to give some background on the house so you understand why I was so freaked out. It was located deep in the neighborhood, on a small side street off the main road. The house was in a cul-de-sac, meaning there was hardly any traffic. Usually just the mailman and the few other residents who lived there. The street itself was short, with only 3 houses on each side leading up to the cul-de-sac. Even though it was part of a larger neighborhood, this particular street was quiet and somewhat hidden. If you didn't live there, you probably wouldn't even know it existed. It was a Friday night in late November, right after Thanksgiving. I arrived at the house around 6 p.m., and the kids were already eating dinner. The parents mentioned they'd be home around midnight and joked that the kids had the whole street to themselves since the other families in the cul-de-sac were out of town for the holiday. After they left, the kids finished eating and we went outside to play. I made sure to lock the front door and took the house key with me. The kids rode their scooters around for about an hour, but for some reason I felt uneasy the entire time. I chalked it up to knowing we were the only ones on the street. Once we went back inside, I locked the front door again and left the key on the kitchen counter. We went to the basement to play and I checked the door one more time before heading downstairs. I was always extra cautious about locking doors. I had seen too many horror movies where the babysitter forgets and things go horribly wrong. While we were in the basement, that same unsettling feeling crept up again. It wasn't like I felt someone watching us, but more like that moment in a horror movie when you just know something bad is about to happen. The tension wouldn't go away, but I kept telling myself it was just because I knew the entire street was empty. Around 10 p.m., it was time for the kids to go to bed, so we headed up to the top floor where their bedrooms were. The house was designed so that if you stood in the foyer by the front door, you could see all the way up the stairs into the bathroom on the second floor. The kids were brushing their teeth when we suddenly heard a car pull into the driveway. I assumed it was their parents coming home early and waited to hear the garage door open. But that never happened. Curious, I walked into the girls' room and looked out the window. There was a car sitting in the driveway with its engine running, but the headlights were off. A man was inside. It was 10 p.m. and completely dark outside, so the fact that he wasn't using his headlights struck me as odd. I figured he was just lost and had pulled in to check a map or GPS before heading back out. I left the room and went back to the bathroom where the kids were when I suddenly heard a knock at the front door. I turned around and saw a man standing there holding a pizza box. There were 2 tall windows on either side of the door, so I had a clear view of him and he had a clear view of us. That eerie feeling I'd had all night came back in full force. I immediately asked the kids if they had ordered a pizza just in case, but they both said no. These kids were very honest and wouldn't lie about something like that or place an order without permission, so I knew they were telling the truth. Normally, I would have gone downstairs to ask the man if he had the wrong house and pointed him in the right direction, but every instinct in me screamed, don't go downstairs. Don't open the door. Something about him was just off. He wasn't wearing a uniform, no hat or shirt with a company logo, nothing that indicated he actually worked for a pizza place. He looked to be in his late 30s or early 40s and was completely disheveled. His shirt was wrinkled, his pants were dirty and torn, and he wore a ratty black baseball cap pulled down low over his eyes. Worst of all, he was grinning, so hard that it looked like his teeth might crack under the pressure. The kids noticed him too and started asking questions. Why was he there? Should we open the door? I told them no and told them to go to their rooms and lie down. The boy went to his room and I walked the girl into hers. Before leaving, I glanced out the window again and noticed that the car in the driveway didn't have a delivery sign on top, something all the pizza places in town required for their drivers. That was the final confirmation I needed. This guy wasn't legit. I stepped out of the girl's room and sat at the top of the stairs, watching him. I tried to stay calm so the kids wouldn't get scared, but I was panicking inside. He was still standing there, holding the pizza box in one hand, that unnatural grin plastered on his face. Even though I couldn't see his eyes, I knew he was staring right at me. Then, without breaking eye contact, he started aggressively jiggling the doorknob, still grinning. I silently thanked myself for double-checking that the door was locked. After a few moments, he stopped messing with the handle and just kept staring. If this happened now, I would have called the police immediately, but at 14, I was too scared to move. I felt like if I took my eyes off him for even a second, he'd suddenly be inside the house. Then, in one of the creepiest moments of my life, he started walking backwards off the porch, still staring at me. Step by step, he moved away from the door without looking away. He reached his car, but instead of getting in, he disappeared from view. The car was still in the driveway, but he was gone. I ran to the parents' bedroom, which had a window overlooking the driveway, and peeked out. The car was there, but he wasn't inside. He was somewhere around the house. I felt sick realizing he was probably testing the other doors looking for a way in. I rushed back to the top of the stairs, half expecting to see him standing at the front door again, or worse, inside the house. But he was nowhere to be seen. About 20 minutes passed before I heard an engine start. I darted back to the parents' window and saw the car slowly backing out of the driveway. The man was in the driver's seat, still grinning. He didn't turn on his headlights. Just before he drove away, he suddenly turned his head, and I swear he knew exactly where I was. The lights in the parents' room were off, and I was crouched down, barely visible, but he snapped his head right to my location. It was like he sensed I was watching him. Looking back, I realized a few things. He wasn't a real pizza delivery guy. No uniform, no sign on his car, and he acted completely unnatural. He probably spent those 20 minutes walking around the house, testing doors and windows. He had bad intentions, whether robbery or something worse. He might have chosen that house because it was the only one occupied at the time. The way he kept grinning and moving felt unnatural, almost inhuman. To this day, I have no idea what his goal was or why he acted the way he did. Maybe he was on drugs, maybe he was just completely unhinged. But I'm so glad I listened to my instincts that night. I go to college in one of the most economically challenged cities in Northern California. While the campus itself is relatively safe thanks to its own Department of Public Safety, it's generally a good idea to stay indoors after dark. That's when the locals start roaming around, sometimes wandering onto campus. About 2 years ago, I lived in an apartment complex right in the heart of campus, and at the time I didn't own a car. It was the end of the fall semester, and since I was the last of my 3 roommates to finish finals, I was home alone. They had already left for winter break. After taking my last exam, I followed my usual post-finals routine, collapsing onto my bed to cry and sleep off the exhaustion of pulling an all-nighter. When I finally woke up, it was past 10 p.m. and I was starving. Unfortunately, both the student grocery store and cafeteria were already closed, and I had nothing in my apartment to eat. Since I had no car to drive anywhere, I found myself hopelessly scouring the fridge for anything edible when I spotted a Domino's coupon stuck to the freezer. Salvation. I decided that ordering an entire pizza and some cheesy bread for myself was completely justified. It was a celebration of finishing finals after all. And if anyone asked, I could always lie and say I was sharing it with a friend. I placed my order and, as required, provided my address, apartment number, and phone number. Normally, I never give my number to businesses, but I'd ordered from Domino's before and knew the drivers often called when they arrived since they frequently got lost navigating campus. About 20 minutes later, my phone rang. The delivery had arrived. It was now close to midnight, and the campus was eerily quiet since most students had already left for break. The driver told me he was parked in front of a dorm across the street from my apartment. As I headed down the stairs, I spotted him standing outside his car, pizza in hand. That's when my instincts kicked in and I slowed down. It suddenly struck me how empty the area was, how poor the lighting was, and the fact that I was walking alone toward a stranger next to a running vehicle. I hesitated, hoping he would cross the street to meet me halfway, but he didn't move. As I approached, I finally got a good look at him. He was a relatively short Hispanic guy, probably between 5 feet 7 inches and 5 feet 9 inches, and appeared to be in his early 20s. Something about him immediately made me uneasy. The only way I can describe it is the same unsettling vibe you get when you're out at a club and suddenly notice the one guy in the crowd who just feels off. The slick back ponytail, sunglasses at night, oversized shirt, sagging pants. The kind of guy whose presence alone makes you feel on edge. Trying to keep things casual, I remained friendly but distant. He made some small talk about how late it was and how deserted the campus seemed, but I rushed through signing the receipt, muttered a quick thanks, and took my food as fast as I could. As I walked back to my apartment, I could feel him watching me. Once inside, I locked the door, latched the chain, and took a moment to calm down. After a few minutes, I shrugged off my uneasiness, chalking it up to paranoia and my overactive imagination. I turned on the TV, got comfortable, and had just lifted my first bite of pizza to my mouth when my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "You're hella sexy." Immediately, I made the connection. The number matched the one the delivery driver had called me from. My initial shock quickly turned into disbelief, followed by laughter. I had just woken up from a nap after a night of studying. I was wearing baggy sweatpants, an oversized sweatshirt, and my hair was a complete disaster. My face was probably greasier than the pizza I was about to eat, and I had my glasses on. I was the furthest thing from hella sexy. The next morning, I casually mentioned the whole thing to my boyfriend, John. He wasn't amused. After hearing about the delivery guy, who signed his name in the text as Philo, John insisted that I report the incident to campus police just to be safe. At first, I hesitated, not wanting to blow things out of proportion, but he eventually convinced me. Later that day, a campus officer came by my apartment. I explained what happened, and he took photos of the text message and wrote down Philo's phone number. Then he asked if I wanted him to contact Domino's, which would likely result in Philo being fired. I wasn't sure what to do. I didn't want him harassing other girls, but I also didn't want to be the reason he lost his job. The officer then asked, "Do you feel threatened by Philo? Do you feel safe in your apartment, knowing he has your phone number and exact address?" That's when the fear truly set in. My stomach dropped and I broke out in a cold sweat. My mind started spiraling into worst-case scenarios, each one ending in my untimely demise. I told the officer to go ahead and report him. About a month later, while I was home for the holidays, John called me. He had been using my apartment to store his bike while I was away, but when he stopped by, he found that the keys wouldn't work. He also noticed broken glass on the floor and a wooden board covering the living room window. I had no idea what he was talking about. Panicked, I called the school the next day, and after being transferred around, I finally got through to public safety. The officer I spoke to confirmed that 2 days after I had left, a maintenance worker reported a broken window. Public safety had boarded it up and changed my lock after noticing signs of tampering. I was horrified. I convinced them to let John inside to check if anything was stolen, but nothing was missing. My TV had been right next to the broken window, and John's expensive road bike was sitting in plain sight, yet nothing was taken. My gut tells me it was Philo. He tried to pick my lock, and when that failed, he broke my window. But if robbery wasn't his goal, what was? Did he break in looking for revenge? Would this have still happened if I hadn't given the officer permission to report him? I try not to think about what his true intentions were, but when I do, my heart still races at the thought of what could have happened if I had been home that night. When I was 20, so about 6 years ago, I worked as a delivery driver for a well-known pizzeria in my area. At first, I worked the late morning to mid-afternoon shift, but after the night shift driver lost his license and got fired, my boss reassigned me to his slot. I didn't want the night shift. Late-night deliveries always made me uneasy. You never know if someone actually wants a pizza or has something else in mind. But my boss was a complete jerk and basically told me that if I refused, I'd be out of a job. Since I couldn't afford to be unemployed, even temporarily, I reluctantly agreed. The first month of night shifts passed without any issues. That changed when I got an order from a house just within our delivery radius. I plugged the address into my GPS and saw that it was in a quiet suburban part of town. I arrived around 11 p.m. The neighborhood was eerily still, fairly well lit, and full of modern townhouses. The address led me to a duplex. I rang the doorbell and waited for about 30 seconds. No answer. I rang it again and waited. Still nothing. As I stood there, growing uneasy, the door finally swung open. A tall, lanky man, probably in his late 40s, stood there staring at me. I told him his pizza had arrived, but he didn't respond right away. When I asked if he was alright, he finally spoke. "Yeah, I'm fine, sorry. I just got off work and I'm zoning out a bit," he said. Fair enough, I thought. He handed me the money, I gave him the pizza, and as I was making change, he suddenly said, "You're really beautiful, you know that?" I didn't think much of it and just thanked him, handing over his change. He said goodnight, and I walked back to my car to finish my shift. A few days later, I got another order from the same house. I showed up around the same time and rang the doorbell. This time he answered excitedly. "Hey, it's you again. How are you?" I was exhausted and just said, "Tired? Can't wait to get home." He chuckled. "Oh, I know that feeling." As he counted out his money, he asked for my name. Being tired and not thinking clearly, I foolishly told him. Then as I made change, he asked for my number, saying he'd love to hang out with someone as gorgeous as me. Whoa, buddy. Pump the brakes. I had only met this guy twice while delivering his food. I didn't know him and he definitely didn't know me. On top of that, I've always looked younger than my actual age. People often said I looked around 15. I hoped that wasn't why he was interested. Feeling awkward, I stammered, "Sorry, I have a boyfriend." His whole mood changed. Oh, okay. I see. We stood in silence before I wished him a good night and turned to leave. He didn't reply. Instead, he just stood in the doorway watching me walk to my car. Even as I got in, he didn't move until I started the engine. The whole thing creeped me out, so I told my coworkers. They all agreed it was weird, except for my boss, who overheard and dismissed it, claiming I was just making up stories for attention. A week later, I was working another night shift when we got another order from that same guy. This is when everything spiraled. I pulled up to the house around 10:30 p.m. From the street, I could see that the place was completely dark. No lights on at all. I grabbed the pizza and headed to the front door. Just as I was about to knock, the door suddenly swung open. The man stood there wearing a suit. I instinctively took a step back. He laughed. "Sorry if I scared you. I saw you coming and figured I'd open the door so you wouldn't have to ring the bell." I forced a nervous chuckle. "It's okay." Then he asked, "Do you like my suit?" I nodded hesitantly. "Yeah, it looks nice. What do you say we go on a date tonight?" I told him again that I had a boyfriend. He smirked, stepped closer and said, "Come on, sweetheart. There's no way a girl your age is in a serious relationship. If you go out with me, I'll show you how a real man treats a lady." Then, without warning, he grabbed the pizza box and tossed it aside before seizing me by the arms, hard. Panic flooded me. I tried to hold back tears as I pleaded, "Please, I just want to go home. I don't want to go on a date." His expression darkened. His grip tightened. "I don't care," he growled. "Get inside. We're gonna have a good time." He started dragging me toward his house. I struggled as hard as I could. Then I saw him reaching into his pocket. My gut told me he was pulling out a knife. In sheer desperation, I swung my free arm and punched him as hard as I could in the stomach. He stumbled back just long enough for me to break free. I bolted for my car, but before I could get inside, he lunged at me, grabbing my arm again. "Why are you making this so damn difficult?" he snarled. I grabbed a half-empty soda bottle from my cup holder and hurled it at his head. It struck him, giving me the chance to slam the door shut. But he wasn't done. He leaped onto the hood of my car, banging on my windshield with the knife, screaming, "Stop the damn sea!" I threw the car into reverse, speeding backward down the street with him clinging to the hood. As I turned onto another road, he lost his grip and tumbled off. I floored it, making random turns through side streets, terrified that he'd chase me down. Finally, at a red light, I stopped. My whole body shook as I broke down crying. It hit me I had almost died. Eventually, I pulled myself together and drove back to the pizzeria. The moment I walked in, my coworkers knew something was wrong. I collapsed in tears as I told them what happened. Even my boss, who had dismissed my concerns before, apologized profusely. He took me to the office and told me to call the police. The cops arrived, took my statement, and photographed the scratches on my arms and car. One of my coworkers followed me home to make sure I got back safely. I quit my job the next day. 2 days later, the police gave me an update. The man lived in the left side of the duplex, while his brother and sister-in-law lived on the right. He had a long criminal history, initially robberies and assaults, but later escalating to sex crimes. He'd been out of jail for about 5 months before I encountered him. When the police arrived at his house, he was gone. His family had no idea where he had fled, but they did find him. Not alive. Apparently, he had tried to kidnap a teenage girl in another city. A witness saw him forcing her into his car and called the police. He tried to escape, but during the chase, he ran a red light and was T-boned by a van. The van's driver only had minor injuries. The man died before paramedics even arrived. When the police told me, I didn't know how to feel. I don't wish death on people. But when I heard he was gone, I felt relief. Relief that he couldn't hurt anyone else. Relief that I'd never have to see him again. And relief that I survived.